This is James Turner of O'Reilly News. I'm talking today with Larry Wall, who certainly needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce him anyway. Larry is the father of Perl. So what does it feel like to kind of be the father of one of the earliest scripting languages and to see it still alive, God, what, 15, 20 years later?
It's 20 years. It's an awful lot like watching a kid grow up. I've had 4 kids of my own, and they're all about the same generation as Perl, so they sort of think of Perl as one of their siblings.
Did it go through its early teenage years?
Yeah. I think Perl 5 is being its adolescence. And, especially when it was about 13, it was, threw some temper tantrums. But it's growing up now, and it's really cool to see how it's shaping up.
Now, when Perl was first in vogue, to use a better term, lack of a better term, it was pretty much used for everything. It was used in CGI scripts for webs. It was kind of the de facto glue language for scripting on Linux and Unix. A lot of those spaces seem to be taken over by more niche languages like PHP and Python on the web side, and certainly now Ruby and Ruby on Rails. Do you think that Perl still has a real role to play in those spaces, or is it really now mainly a good system administration, scripting language, and kind of general quick program language?
Well, Perl has always been aimed at a more general usage than a lot of these niche languages are, and so it's kind of natural. It comes and goes which niches it's used in. It was sort of a natural at the beginning when the web was being prototyped. They needed a text processing language because HTML is text, and they needed a glue language because databases need to be glued, and Perl was there, so people used it. It doesn't really bother me that specialized languages arise. We've always been aiming more towards the generalist ecological niche. That there's a lot of animals and plants make a good living being specialized. But Perl is, it's you sort of get 2 different kinds of language designers. You get the people who want to design a language that's just good for one thing, and they're happy with that. Just as you get writers that like to write a novel or a story that's a one-off, and they just put it out there, and then they go off and write something else. And then you get other writers like, say, Tolkien, who everything they think of ends up in the same story, pretty much, or Mahler, a composer, he just dumps everything into the same symphony. Perl is more like that in its feeling, it's like it's not like the specialists like penguins or eagles. It's more generalists like crows and mockingbirds, so we're good at mocking, I guess. That doesn't mean we don't like it to be good at the specialized things, and so there's these trade-offs in the design that we certainly like to have it all if we can. But
well, certainly one of the strengths of Perl has been CPAN, and the fact that just about anything that you would want to do, you can find in CPAN. What do you think has led to CPAN being such a success? It was really one of the first community language repositories. Why did it succeed? And because it really has served as a model, I think, for a lot of the other ones.
Well, you can think of it as one of the first indications of Web 2.0, to use the current buzz phrase.
You've made Tim happy now, so.
Yeah, well, if we're at OSCON, I have to make Tim happy. I like to make Tim happy. That's one of the reasons my nickname is Tim Toady, actually, is I like to toady up to Tim. But really, this idea of community participation in a site that is available to everyone, the whole open source ideal that feeds into the web, it's all of a piece, I think. And the other flip side of that is the thing that's kind of peculiar about the Perl community, I find, is that they're all just all pathologically helpful people. The first time we had the first Perl conference that sort of grew into OSCON, and we had a party for the Perl folks that showed up there at my house down in the Bay Area, and it was amazing to meet these people, but it was also amazing to see just how helpful they are. Can I take some chairs in here? Can I put the food out? Can I do this? Can I do that? They're all just, I don't know why we seem to have accumulated those sorts of people who just kind of love to let it hang out in that way, but they do.
One of the hallmarks that seems to be associated with the most successful open source projects is, for lack of a better term, a benevolent dictator who kind of sits atop. Certainly, Linus has taken that role of Linux. Do you see that as one of your roles with Perl, to be kind of the final arbiter of?
Fortunately and unfortunately, yes. It has its upsides and its downsides, and if you can see a pattern in various open source dictators, but if you look a little more closely, there's lots of different styles and a lot of leeway in that. Some are more benevolent and some are more dictatorial. My own personal feeling is that it's a privilege to be in that position, but it's very easy to lose the respect of people if you abuse it. One tries to avoid coming down hard on people as much as possible. I think I've only ever called someone up on the phone and yelled at them once in my life, under great provocation. But by and large, if you respect the other people in the community, they respect they respect you in the sense that you kind of respect the Supreme Court. They're not trying to make up the laws. They're not trying to execute the laws. They're just trying to interpret them. And so I try to view myself more in the role of the Supreme Court than
kind of trying to keep it coherent and of the right philosophy and flavor, rather than
that's not to say that I didn't have some say in making the laws or even trying to implement them. But as I get older, I find that other people generally are better at implementation than I am, except for the places where they haven't a clue what I want, and then I have to do it myself anyway. But
Perl has kind of a notorious reputation for not the language inherently, but the way people tend to use it, of producing some fairly unreadable code from time to time. Do you think that's a unique feature of Perl programmers, or the type of problems they tend to attack, or is it an unjust?
It is both just and unjust. On the one hand, the regular expressions the notation that we borrowed from Unix culture was already a complete mess, and we only made it worse.
Right, it's line noise by design.
And the fact is, you can write obfuscated code in any language. That being said, we also have a culture that because you can optimize for whatever you want, external reasons as well as just speed or time. One of the things sometimes people optimize for, with great delight, is obfuscation, or another thing that another game they like to play, they call it golf, is to see, how few strokes, as in keystrokes, you can write a program in, and that's another thing to optimize for. I think the people who actually use Perl successfully in industry recognize that it's quite easy to write quite readable code and do so when that is the thing you are optimizing for. And that being said, there are various design features that Perl came up with. Regular expressions was one of them, but there are other things that accreted on over the years. There's the readability, or there's the complexity of the solution that's necessary to solve your problem, and then there's additional induced complexity. It's kind of like induced drag on an airplane. You don't really want it. So part of our redesign of Perl 6 is to look very carefully at all those places where we want the syntactic complexity and where it enhances readability. And to be fair, some of what people find off-putting about Perl sometimes actually, once you get to know Perl, it actually enhances readability because you can tell just exactly what kind of a variable you're looking at, and but we're trying with Perl 6 to get rid of the artificial stupidities and
so just leave it with the natural stupidity.
Yeah, or something like that, however you want to say that.
Right. But. Some of the scripting languages, notably Python and Ruby, are crossing the divide over to the Redmond side of the world. You're seeing and are producing CLR-based products like IronPython and IronRuby. Do you think Perl has a place in there? Do you think there's a utility to it? Do you think there's a philosophical benefit to it?
Oh, certainly. Perl has always been a language that wanted to run on every platform it could run on. And historically, that meant all the platforms that had a C compiler. Now, obviously, that is changing, but we do have a little bit of a timing issue right here. Perl 5, the design of that was such that it's really very difficult to retarget it to other VMs. Perl 6, of course, we're wanting to target it to many VMs, but the timing issue is that we decided at the beginning of the Perl 6 redesign to take a big hit in terms of, usually the worse is better approach out-evolves the better is better approach. We felt with the stability of Perl 5 and its maturity that we could afford to take the hit, to take one better is better design cycle instead of worst is better. And so in that interval, since we started redesigning Perl 6, a lot of this development has happened. And we see it happening, and we say, oh, we'll get there someday. And the design that we're doing will be quite a bit more amenable to that. And in fact, one of the explicit design goals of Perl 6 is that it will run on multiple implementations. It is not defined by a single implementation that happens to be in C. It is defined by its test suite and by its specifications. So, and we have several implementations in progress, and they're all trying out different aspects of the design. And now we're in the integration phase where we're just trying to get everybody converging on the same solution.
Another kind of knock that you hear against Perl is that it doesn't scale into the enterprise, that you're not going to write your million-line transactional financial app in it.
Yeah, well, million-line in Java would be only about 100,000-line in Perl, maybe. But yeah, there are people in industry who laugh at that attitude because they have the large-scale Perl apps that they seem to think works fine. But there are some design features of Perl which tend to do this induced drag that I spoke of earlier when you start getting into programming the large. And you have to be, with Perl historically, you have to be more disciplined and know how to make it scale. We're trying to make those decisions the default in Perl 6, rather than you having to pick them just the natural way that you would write objects and classes and compose new units of meaning. Those will, by default, be the ones that are designed to scale into enterprise-wide application, and at the same time keep what it is about Perl that people love on the small scale, fast prototyping, rapid turnaround, feel like it's just right under your fingers. And so it's going to be a neat trick if we can pull it off. But I think I think that we're starting to see the signs that it's going to be successful.
To finish off, it can be argued that Perl really was at the beginning of, in a lot of ways, of the open source revolution. It was certainly one of the first open source languages that people used widely. It was, the Camel book was probably the first, computer book that a lot of people had, certainly from O'Reilly on their
we tried to raise the bar, at least on humor. But
so you've seen a lot of the arc of the open source movement over the years. We've seen a lot of things like increasing participation by corporate sponsors, more of a monetization of open source properties. Can you just speak a little bit to what you see as the changes that have gone on over probably the last 20, 25 years?
I think the most important change is that there really is an open source story. When I started off, you could not really do open source programming for a company with the company's official knowledge. The way it worked back then is if you did something like that, if you went to the company and said, "Can I release this?" they would hand it to the lawyers, and the lawyers would sit on it 6 months, and then they come back and say no. And then you say, "Well, but is the company ever going to do anything with it?" No, probably not. But it's our property. We're going to sit it on the shelf here, and it's just going to sit there. So the only way to do open source back at the beginning was either to be independently wealthy, or to work for somebody who didn't really care about what you're doing and was forgiving enough to let the things go under the table. And I was fortunate to work in some of those places where I had some very understanding managers who allowed me to release some of these early things like RN and patch. And I think it's just wonderful that you can actually pitch a business case now to a company saying, this is not your core competence here, so you don't need to regard this as your intellectual property. You'll actually get more leverage by letting the community help you develop this. And it's great that story has developed. As far as monetization, well, that's what businesses are about. And the fact that people are making money off of it, that's wonderful. In some of my very early copyrights that I put in my code, I said silly things like, you may use this as long as you don't try to make money off it or pretend that you wrote it. And since then, people keep coming back and saying, we want to take this ancient program of yours and put it in our distribution, but what does make money off of it mean? And I said, it's fine, I'm sorry, I didn't really mean it. You may make money off it. I'm delighted if you make money off of it. Just relicense it under the artistic license or the GPL or something now.
Well, in some ways, that's a very different attitude than the Free Software Foundation has, who seem to believe that nobody should really be making money off of it.
Well, then, if you to be fair, if you actually pin them down on that, they say, you should be allowed to make money with free software. You're just not allowed to hoard it, is their emphasis. I tend to be of a slightly more practical bent than an ideological bent. I just like writing code that people use. So that one of the fun hacks that I did over the years was the dual licensing hack. Though that term has come to mean different things now. It used to mean, when I first came up with it, that you could distribute Perl under either the artistic license or the GPL, and you did not have to pick. It was sort of a quantum...
right. The license did not come into being.
It was a quantum superposition of licenses, and as long as you didn't observe it, you didn't actually have to pick. Nowadays, dual licensing has tended to take a more classical view of the mechanics, and I don't know whether it's Copenhagen or many worlds.
Right. If you observe it as a hobbyist, it's one license, and if you observe it as a business, it's another license.
Yeah. So one of the things we're doing, another thing we're doing with Perl 6 is actually cleaning up the license, and it will just be at least the parrot effort. It's going to be under the Artistic 2 license, which is also GPL compatible. So we're getting the same effect essentially without trying to be quite so tricky.
Well, Larry, it's been a pleasure talking to you. And are you giving a state of the?
Yes, I'll be giving a State of the Onion on Thursday night. I plan to be a lot more boring than usual. I'm actually going to be talking about technology as opposed to culture mostly. So.
All right, well, we look forward to hearing it, and enjoy the rest of your convention.
Well, thank you very much.